2 John, the elder, to the lady chosen by God and to her children, whom I love in the truth, and not I only, but also all who know the truth. Oh, sorry, I'm reading from NIV. Okay.
Go ahead.
I'll read from the screen. Okay. From verse 2, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you.
Okay, thank you very much for reading. And I guess as you read that, you notice that it sounds a lot like 1 John, doesn't it? I mean, it's a lot of the same themes, the same ideas that we've just seen in 1 John. You see them coming out here in 2 John. I think it's fair to say that 2 and 3 John are some of the most neglected books in the New Testament, although they're actually very valuable to read and to study. My suggestion is that the best time to preach or to teach 2 and 3 John is straight after 1 John. Right? I think they work together really nicely as a package. So it doesn't make sense to just find a filler week and just do 2 John or 3 John. You could do that, I suppose, but the best way to study 2 and 3 John is actually to study it together with 1 John, because there's a lot of connections between them. Right? Now, essentially, 2 John is written as a warning against welcoming false teachers. That's the basic point of it. It's a warning against welcoming false teachers. Right? But it does emphasize the importance of walking in obedience to the truth of the gospel, which means truth test, doctrinal fidelity, believing the right things about Jesus, and it also means love for one another. But it's really John's warning to stick with the apostles and their teaching, and to not compromise by expressing fellowship with those who teach false things. So you see that come through in a couple of different ways, but especially verses 7 and 8, isn't it? It talks about many deceivers have gone out in the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the antichrist. Watch yourselves that you may not lose what you have for. And then he says in verse 10, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, that is my teaching, the apostles' teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. Whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Right? Because when you welcome someone into your home, or when you eat with someone, or even you greet them, these are expressions of fellowship, you see. And it's saying, look, if you express fellowship in these ways with a false teacher, then you are sharing in their wicked works. So he's saying, don't welcome false teachers into your home. Don't express fellowship with them. Because remember, the context is that in those days you have lots of people going around as visiting speakers, and this included the missionaries, of course, like Paul and others who would go around from city to city preaching the gospel. And what you would do is, as you went into the city, you'd find somewhere to stay. You know, you'd have to find somewhere to stay that would be your home base as you went about doing your preaching ministry, right? And so it's not there would be various Christian brothers going around preaching the true gospel, but there would also be these people going around preaching the false gospel, some of the false teachings that we've seen, maybe from the Judaizers, maybe from the antinomian teaching we've seen in 1 Peter and Jude, or this kind of proto-Gnostic teaching that we see in John's epistles. There's various forms of false teaching going around as well. And he's saying, look, as these guys come, don't welcome them. If they don't believe the true things about Jesus, they are antichrist, and don't welcome them, or you participate, you are contributing to their the propagation of their false message in their life that flows from it. That's really the big point of 2 John. Well, let's step back. Let's look at a couple of the background issues, and then we'll just flesh that out a little bit more. Share the slides. Okay, so to John, right? We've done the introduction already. So let's go to the idea of the authorship. And as we saw in the previous lecture, it's significant that none of the 3 Johannine epistles are ever attributed to anyone other than John the Apostle, right? And we've seen a couple of people recognize, Dionysius of Alexander recognizes 2 and 3 John as John's. At least 2 are reckoned to John in the Moratorium fragment. And remember, it's a fragment, so it doesn't mean that the other epistle is not in there. It could be just on the missing leaf of the scroll. So and then almost all scholars agree that the author of 2 and 3 John is the same author as 1 John, because there's just so many connections between them, right? So Jesus Christ has come in the flesh, 1 John 4:2, 2 John 7. The deceiver and the antichrist in 1 John 2, also 2 John 7. Love in truth, 1 John 3, also in 2 John 1, also in 3 John 1. That your joy may be full. We saw that at the beginning of 1 John, also here in 2 John verse 12. Those who love and do good are from God, 1 John 3, also in 3 John. So it just sounds so much like 1 John. It's impossible to think that someone else could have written it who wasn't the same author as 1 John. And we've seen that the evidence is very strong for John the Apostle writing 1 John, which means it's just as the evidence is just as strong that he writes has written 2 and 3 John as well. There's also, not only is there common expressions between 2 and 3 John and 1 John, but also connections between 2 John and 3 John, right? So love in the truth is in both. Walking in the truth is in both 2 John and 3 John. And they both have different, it's very similar endings, isn't it? The ending of 2 John. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. And then the end of 3 John, I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. So yeah, it's very similar ways. And of course, I think that it's one of the little gems that you find at the end of 2 and 3 John, isn't it? Especially now that we've lived through, through COVID and the, all those times being at home, online church, Zoom meetings, and so on. He says, I long to see you face to face. Okay? True Christian fellowship and love must be expressed face to face. We can all acknowledge that there's something different about doing a Zoom class, right? To be in an actual classroom. I mean, some of you are now decided that, it's better to, a couple of you sitting in the same classroom doing the course together, even though I'm on the other, the other different, other side of the country. At least the three of you can be together, and that's the precious thing about Christian fellowship, and that's something that's really underlined by 2 and 3 John. He says, I can write to you, but I want to see you face to face. Right? Christians should be together, and physically together, face to face. That's the best way to express fellowship and love. So 2 John is like 1 John, 2 John is also like 3 John. And 1 John is like John's gospel. So any logical conclusion is that John wrote it lah. Yeah, John the apostle wrote all of these epistles. Now, the author of 2 John and 3 John, he identifies himself as the elder. Right? Now, you might remember from the last semester that there was supposedly someone going around who was called. People are positive that there was someone called John the Elder who wrote, who was someone different to John the Apostle, and therefore that 2 and 3 John is not written by John the Apostle, it's written by someone else who they call John the Elder. But this is very unlikely. If you look at 1 Peter 5 verse 1, Peter the Apostle calls himself a fellow elder. And so I think John, or the elder, is just a way that John is talking about himself. Okay, let's go on to the provenance and dating. So as we said, the similarity between the letters suggests that they're all written around the same time. 1 John probably written in Ephesus around 90-something, maybe 96. So it's probably likely that 2 and 3 John is written at a similar time to that. Okay, let's go to audience. 2 John is addressed to the elect lady and her children. Now, this is almost certainly a way of describing a church, right? Remember, the Greek word for church, klesia, is female, right? And elect means chosen, right? Which is a very kind of loaded biblical term. Israel was elect. We saw Peter addressing to the elect exiles, and James also talking with a very similar expression as well. So the elect lady and her children seems to be a way of talking about a church, right? And this is confirmed by the closing greeting. At the end, it says, "The children of your sister, who is chosen by God." Which is surely understood as another church that is sending greetings to this church. But as you can imagine, some people argue that the elect lady must be talking about some individual, right, and so on. But this is highly unlikely. It's one church that's being written to another church. That's how the terminology is meant to be understood. Okay, let's go on to the occasion and purpose. Okay, so it said that 2 John is to warn against welcoming false teachers into their home, and the description of the false teachers, it sounds a lot like the false teaching in 1 John, doesn't it? They're deceivers. They don't confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh, and this is the Antichrist, right? So Peterson writes this: the wandering prophet or preacher confronted the church with a number of problems, particularly when they were clever and influential. Christians were accustomed to offering hospitality to these itinerant preachers. Sometimes this was at considerable expense to individuals and congregations. John was entirely justified in warning them about the false teachings and practices of these men. Right? So don't just welcome on anyone. Make sure you test whether their teaching is from God before you welcome them. Structure, not very difficult. You've got the opening introduction or greeting. And then you've got the central section, which is 4 to 11. You can break it down into 3 parts: walking in the truth, the denial of the truth, and then not receiving those who deny the truth, and then the conclusion. So some of the themes would be truth, love, obedience, and false teaching. That does sound very familiar after we've looked at 1 John. How about we just close here? Let's have a look at the letter itself. Let's just make a couple of comments about each of the verses, and then we can go across to 3 John. So back to 2 John verse 1. The elder and the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. So we've said that the elder is John, the elect lady and her children is the local church and its members. And then we have 2 themes introduced, right? Which is love and truth. And we often find these 2 things together, and we find them together here in the introduction. So what binds Christians together is a common conviction of the truth that leads to a common love for one another. And we're told that this truth abides in them. That's probably a reference to John 14:6, where Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. So the truth that abides in us is Jesus. Jesus is the truth who abides in us. And then he goes, grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from the God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. And again, you see those 2 themes together, truth and love, right? So verses 4 to 6, as we come to the main body of the letter, the first part is the encouragement to walk in the truth, right? John is happy that they are walking in the truth. He rejoices that they are walking in the truth. But that implies that other people are not walking in the truth. And so he urges them to continue on in the truth. And he says, I'm not writing a new commandment, that the one that we had from the beginning, to love one another, right? And love is then defined as walking according to God's commandments, right? Now, this is also quite relevant for our modern day, because, so for example, the LGBT thing, people say, oh, isn't God is love? 1 John 4. So if God is love, then surely all love is honoring to God. So if a man loves a man or a woman loves a woman, then isn't all love good? They're sure God is love. God loves us. They're loving each other. Who are we to say that it's wrong? This is kind of argument that comes from more liberal circles. But they obviously haven't read the rest of 1, 2, or 3 John, because 2 John 6, for example, says, this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. So what does Jesus command? Well, among other things, of course, there are commandments about against homosexuality and so on. So therefore, it cannot be loving to practice something that God calls sin. Right? You might feel that it's loving, but it's not actually loving, because God defines what is loving and what isn't loving. Love is defined by his commandments. And this goes back to the Old Testament, isn't it? Remember when Jesus is asked, which is the greatest commandment in the law. How does Jesus summarize the law? First commandment, love God, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second command, love your neighbor as yourself. On these hang all the law and the prophets. So Jesus' summary of the law, all the commandments, as many hundred commandments in the Old Testament law, that's the summary. Love God, love your neighbor. But it means that love is then defined by the commandments, you see. You cannot separate love as an abstract concept separate from God's commands. This is where the epistles of John is actually very helpful. And in fact, you'll find the same teaching in John's gospel too, especially in the upper room discourse in John 14-17. Okay, so that's walk in the truth, walk in love. But then there are those who deny the truth. This is verse 7-9. Many deceivers have gone into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such one is a deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves that you do not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. So as we said, the description here, it sounds like the teachers that we have in 1 John. So it could be the same kind of proto-Gnostic or Corinthian teaching that we've talked about. He says, watch yourselves, right? Because embracing this teaching will actually make you lose what we've worked for. That is, you will lose your full reward. You will lose your salvation. Notice how false teaching is described as going on ahead and not abiding in the teaching of Christ. That is, a true teacher or a faithful teacher is the one who sticks with the old message, right? Usually those who are what we would call progressive, right, are actually probably false teachers. Anyone who's trying to bring progressive teachings probably means that they are going on ahead or departing from the true teachings of Christ. That's how John describes it here. Right? So we too today, we want to hold fast to the teaching of the apostles, right? Because anyone who does not abide to the teaching of Christ does not have God. That is, they're not a Christian. They don't have salvation. And this leads to the main aim, right? That is that we reject those who deny the truth. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. Whoever greets him takes part in his wicked work. So don't show hospitality to false teachers. You cannot be a godly false teacher. Notice how the false teacher is described as, his false teaching is described as a wicked work. Only true teaching is good and righteous and loving. False teaching is never loving, it is never righteous, it is wicked. And then he ends with his farewell. He longs for the joy of being with them, with these people who share in walking in the truth and love. Okay, so that's 2 John. Any questions you want to ask on 2 John?